Hey guys, Shelly again. So I'm going to give you a disclaimer about, this is entertainment purposes, 18 and plus, blah, 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 just like any other video. Take from it what you want. All opinions are my own. And anybody in this video probably has their own opinion of the happenings. I thought it was important to give you context of where this all started. I'm gonna apologize in advance because this is gonna be a longer video. After I recorded those videos that I was talking to you from Costa Rica, a wave hit me and literally crashed my entire computer. So now you're with me in Ireland, and I was going to show you the beautiful view, but it's too damn cold. So now you're in a little sound meditation room. This one's pretty hard for me, so bear with me. And just a disclaimer, I'm going to talk about Hadi. I told you before I'm changing some details a little bit just to protect the privacy of people that are in these videos as much as I can. I'm going to talk about Hadi and the love story and where all the journey began for me, from my perspective. He's super private too. So I'm going to keep some things to myself, but some of these things were important to share for the context of the healing journey. So like so many others, I thought I had it all together in my life. One of my best friends and longtime ex-lovers recently told me that he often thought that I should have been born with a penis. Now, don't get all up in arms about that statement. For him, he meant it as a high compliment. Outwardly, I had my proverbial shit together. I did what I wanted when I wanted, and I took no prisoners. I mentioned this before in my intro video, but I'd owned my own executive coaching business for 15 years, have worked incredibly hard to build executive clientele who came exclusively through word of mouth referrals. So not only was I an entrepreneur, but I traveled when I want and lived according to my own rules in both relationships and life. So I was living my dream. I was fearless and taking on the world according to my own terms. So in essence, I often thought myself I should have been born with a penis too, in terms of how society's standards and stereotypes are inferred in the US. I just knew that I was bold enough and given enough time could make anything happen that I set my mind to it. I could conquer the world. And then my world unequivocally collapsed and taught me how wrong I was. In an instant, my life and everything I was so confident that I'd built for myself just shattered. I was well and truly confused, hurt, angry, and in short, completely devastated. My world turned upside down and was filled with nothing but bleak darkness. The only man that I had truly, authentically loved in a forever way, my person, my everything, was gone. So let me go back and explain the story through my lens and my opinions. I'm going to refer to him as Hadi. Just for context, I moved into a neighborhood with a short-term rental situation for the summer, and Hadi lived there. The neighborhood had a gazebo and a bar right there. I know it's weird that I'm sharing it, but it's relevant. When I met him, and I'll be honest, I don't even remember how I met him. He wasn't my usual type. In other videos, as we go through this healing journey, I'll talk about other relationships. But most of the people that I'm attracted to were taller, different hair color. But immediately, I date big guys, like think hockey players or special ops, but he's my height. But immediately there was just something about him. Like I could see his soul as soon as I met him and was immediately drawn to him. This relationship unfolded over a period of several months, and I'm going to do my best to give you this story to the best of my recollection. So just to frame my headspace at the time, I was really kind of over my skis. I was coming from a place of being completely out of my wheelhouse. I was working on a startup venture. I had been invited, which is super competitive, to apply on the NSF America Seed Fund. It's an R&D innovation grant. And so really, I'm traditionally what you would think of as HR and consulting. This was a very heavily technical 60-page project paper, And I was really overwhelmed with making it happen because it's free money for no equity. So any of you who are doing a startup, take a look at it. But anyway, just to frame it. So what I had done was I was working for a global consulting firm that's an outplacement firm, which was about 50% of my revenues. I stopped doing that. I was still taking on private clients, which was my bread and butter. And then I was also doing artificial intelligence consulting at night. So honestly, I was just completely overwhelmed, feeling at my least confident with all the technical things I'm going. Oh, and I had filed a patent, which is a play on NFTs, and the full patent was due. So again, super technical knowledge. I was doing the best way I can. And meeting him was like a respite in my storm, kind of my safe place. There's so many details to this relationship, but what I'm going to try to share with you is kind of the best recollections of my emotions, how I felt about him, with some relevant highlights. So as I said, when I met him, immediately I wanted to know more about him. He had a charming drawl, and he called everyone darling, which was charming with others, but I hated it when he called me that a couple of times when we first started talking. With him, every time I talked to him, I never got bored. And candidly, most people bore me pretty damn quickly. You know, I already told you I was working my butt off. And normally at the end of my day, because I'm so engaged and because I'm so on, I just don't want to talk to people. With him, it was like I couldn't get enough, which was so the antithesis of how I normally am at the end of the day. Pretty quickly, it turned into every week we would spend talking like between 24 to 30 hours, literally. Talking about deep shit, not surface, our respective childhood shit, our hopes, our dreams, our fears, our history, and our conversations weren't just limited to that. We talked about everything from inventions, philosophies, trips, life experiences, technology, conspiracy theories, you name it, we talked about it. There were so many times that we wouldn't realize how long we had talked for over the night. And we'd realize that we had spent all night talking because we saw people waking up to go to work in the neighborhood. He used to tease me that he needed to get up early so he couldn't start talking to me as he wouldn't stop. A close friend of mine who lived local to where I was staying used to tease me when we went out to dinner in those early times about being in love with him and not realizing it. I used to laugh at her when she said it. I just found him fascinating, and I was super attracted to our chemistry. When we met, we both were pretty articulate about not looking for a relationship and had both expressed that to each other quite openly. As time progressed, and honestly, I can't remember all the details, more the feeling. I remember that what got me through the overwhelming days was the excitement of seeing him and spending time with him. People in the neighborhood used to stop by when we were talking, and I remember thinking, oh, it's fine for them to come for a while, but then I just wanted them to go away so I could have him all to myself. The first time he wanted to sleep with me was the first time that it hit me, I think. I all of a sudden realized I wasn't sure what to do with him. See, I'd heard a friend back in the day by having a friends with benefits situation and had made rules for myself. Either just sleep with someone because I want to, or be in a situation where we were dating and we were mutually thinking this could grow. And he didn't really fit into either category. I remember being shocked that I realized he just wasn't a bang or a date. So we went out to dinner and I shared that with him. I didn't want him to think I didn't want him. But to be honest, I hated vulnerability and sharing my feelings. But with him, there was something super weird that just happened. I was always completely rawly me. I'm not sure why. A close friend of mine defined intimacy a long time ago at dinner with me. And at the time, I didn't get it. And she said, intimacy is really truly about sharing warts and all, just sharing your soft side, sharing everything about you in a way that's compelling. It's funny because I spent 5 years with someone and I shared more with Hottie than I did with the guy I've spent 5 years with. The relationship progressed and we're both super intuitive, which was super weird for me. I've always been the type of person where I could read someone walking into a room, whether I knew them or not. But having him be able to read me was super freaky for me. We could talk without even talking. When we were hanging out in the neighborhood, we would literally be having conversations without saying a word when other people were around. I remember one time there was someone who was making him really angry and he was keeping his temper well, and I just kind of put my hand on his thigh and immediately he was calm. We just had that relationship. Most of the time we were spending time in the neighborhood. Um, you know, we did go out sometimes. I knew that, you know, money to me is meant to be shared, and we didn't go out a lot, but in most cases, anybody knows me that, when we go out, I'll treat, I'm always generous, but it's just one of those things. It didn't bother me. I knew that even with my private clients and my consulting and doing it half time, I made more money than him, and it didn't really bother me. Um, as time went on, we were more physical and I got in deeper without even realizing it. I started to notice that he would be hot and cold with physicality. I'm someone who's super touchy. And then he was, and then he wasn't, sometime on a dime. It was like a switch, almost like he caught himself when he was having a good time or caught himself when he was holding my hand and then acted cold. So I addressed it with him, but I knew he had a lot on his plate. I didn't really think much of it. Honestly, in retrospect, I know I would tell anybody it's kind of like a puppy. First time you do it, put him outside. Now, I'm not being disrespectful and calling him a puppy, but, honestly, learning boundaries is super important. At the time, didn't think much of it. I was so busy and just really didn't care. I addressed it with him and didn't think too much of it. We were both people who loved our own space. And so he always ended up coming to my space because I was so busy when he wasn't around. He was around 4 or 5 nights of the week. He always ended up coming to mine unexpectedly, and I'm not someone who really cares about labels. So when he popped up, he spent the night and he felt like home to me. He made me feel super safe, even though I knew he was hot and cold. It was super weird to me. It's almost like I could see his soul, but I wasn't paying attention to what his actions were. It was super weird. Over time, he would share things with me like he wanted me to meet his family. He would describe how we would design a house together, and rattled off like 600 different scenarios of how we would act when we're together and what our reactions would be. I could tell he'd spent tons of time thinking about our future. It was so specific in this, specific scenarios. He was always in his head and I was always a feeler. The day after every single one of these times, he'd either claim that he didn't remember saying it or say something like, we're not dating right. Somewhere deep inside of me, I knew he was gaslighting me, but to be honest, I saw his emotions in his eyes for me. And back then, I was focused on, I think, just hitting the right button to make sure he knew it was okay because it sounded like his past relationship sucked. I'm a fixer. And I could intuitively see how he felt about me and knew that he would just come around. He was always soliciting my company to stay with me. I drove him to work. We were settling into a relationship without a relationship, whether he realized it or not. So the more time I spent with him, despite the hot and cold mixed messages, the more I realized, despite our vastly different traits, he was literally my missing puzzle piece. A weird thing happened when I met him, and this wasn't, later in the relationship. I always had this strong intuition, but being with him was like someone flipped a switch. My intuition was 100% stronger. We could literally see each other when we weren't together. I could read his energy. It candidly freaked me out. I was someone who was always spiritual, but had never had this stuff happen to me. And while he wasn't perfect in our relationship, neither was I. His strengths were my weaknesses and vice versa. And candidly, he made me laugh more than anyone. He gave me shit. He had intellectual debates with me. I was hooked physically and intellectually, which for me was super rare. He felt like home, period. Because my closest friends were sick of hearing about him, I started making friends with someone in the local bar. She was super open to talking about the relationship woes and trying to figure out how men thought. I'm going to call her Layla. You can look it up in Arabic. I spent a lot of time hearing about her separation with her husband, supported her a lot about how she felt, and gave her an extensive ear on her struggles with life. I supported her throughout the process when she went back to her husband, and for several days was trying to make it work, both listening to their physical and emotional relationship, and I was there for her. I was there for her when she decided to try with her husband for another child over a period of those couple days. And then all of a sudden, she came back to the neighborhood and realized that they should separate for good. The reason I'm telling you all of this about Layla is all be relevant later. But during this period of time, I had a couple intuitive pokes that she wasn't really my friend and she was after Hadi. I just laughed it off and shared it with my good friend at dinner one night. I just don't think that way. And my good friend reminded me that my intuition was always on point and to be careful. Long story short, after several intuitive pokes from the universe, I literally had a download where I saw her having sex with Hadi, naked on top of him. Fun, I know, fun vision. I'll go into the story about this more on another video, but I needed to frame it. Along with those visions, I had a vision of Hadi choosing money over love and several other things that I'll keep to myself. One of those visions also included a family member. But again, that's for me for now. It was super confusing having these Technicolor visions while going through all this and trying to understand what was happening with Hadi, what was happening spiritually. So let me go back to the story of Hadi. I told you he made me laugh and challenge me, and he was literally one of the smartest people that I've ever met, despite our educational differences. I quickly realized that he was one amazing human being, despite the dark shit that had happened to him in the past. He had conquered it through sheer grit and determination. I respected him for everything he achieved. You know, he's one of those guys that always fed homeless people when he saw them, had a deep love for animals, fiercely protective, and despite everything he had been through, he had a big, fat, beautiful heart. For me, it was like those pieces of art where you break the glass and put it all together, and it makes it so much more beautiful and intricate. Intuitively, I knew he struggled with us, and it made me be super vocal about how incredible he was and how much of a gift being with him was. Despite vulnerability, never, ever, ever being my forte. On one of our nights that we were both needing space, I heard from a guy that I'd met in a bar during the very beginning phases of my meeting Hadi and figuring out what this was. I told the guy point blank that I wasn't interested, but there were a couple girls at the bar that I thought he would click with, and they needed a man. So I told him to come up. I was pretty candid with him, had no interest in him, and introduced him to the girls at the bar. You know, this part of the story is super hard for me. You know, for a long time I was ashamed about this, but again, I'll share and you'll see my process later in this. But the bartender at the bar had given us a couple shots as a part of that. Now, you've got to understand, I haven't gotten hammered since college. And so while we were at the bar, the drinks were so strong that literally I stood up and I was completely hammered. The place that I was staying in was super small. And the guy that I was telling you about, I didn't want him driving back 45 minutes hammered. And so what I told him is I'd go stay with Hadi and he could stay in my place. It was too small for both of us to stay there and I didn't want to stay there anyway. So long story short, I had set him up with the girls, told him he could stay in my place, and popped up on Hadi. Well, I popped up on Hadi and I was hammered and I could tell he was pissed. I don't know if he was pissed because I was hammered. I wasn't really making any much sense. But I went into Hadi's house. And so told him about the guy, told him, the guy was in my house, and realized that I hadn't taken my meds, which I needed to take. And so tried to get Hadi to go back and pick up my meds from my house. Long story short, I don't remember if he was super irritated or didn't do it, but I ended up falling asleep and then waking up again, realizing I needed to go get those meds. So walked to my house, the guy was gone. So I was like, great, stripped naked, took my meds, jumped in bed. Super dark. I woke up, I don't know how much longer later, and literally someone was inside of me. And I thought it was Hadi. The guy started talking. And honestly, when this person was inside of me, I was dead asleep. And I woke up to someone being inside of me. Now, I'll be honest with you. It's one of my favorite ways to wake up. But I thought it was Hadi. And then I realized we weren't connecting. And a minute later, I heard this guy's voice. And it was the guy from the bar. And so I literally jumped up and I was mortified. Now, we all know that worst case, that's taking advantage of me. Worst case, that's rape. At the time, I was in such a place, I'm ashamed to say, that I was so worried about cheating on Hadi that it didn't even dawn on me. I jumped up. I was super upset. I got dressed, ran out of the house, and I was walking in between the houses, super worried about it. Now, I really wanted to tell him, went back to his house. He was still sleeping, woke up the next day, went back to my house. The guy was still there and had the gall to say something smart ass like I got action from two people. Why was I smiling? And I literally tore into him and told him to get his ass out of my house. I stood outside. Just to make this situation worse was, my neighbor was making commentary the whole time about me having strange men in my house, and all I wanted was this guy out of my house. I went to a sibling's pool for the day, came back, realized I needed to tell Hadi. Again, I don't even know why I was so concerned about him instead of myself, but you'll see later in my journey. I'll explain it. But at the time, I was devastated. And just a little situation. So in the past, when we were hanging out, there was a friend of ours that was a male that I went out to dinner with like once a week. And I didn't really think Hadi cared about it. But one time when we were all sitting at night talking, there was a situation where literally Hadi got all up in arms thinking that I was making eyes at the guy behind him, and he wouldn't listen to reason. The reason I'm saying this is when I got back from the pool and I was, gonna tell Hadi about this, he said, I don't want to talk about it. And honestly, at the time, now I wish I had told him, because I could have used the support, and also I should have told him. At the time, I just didn't think he'd believe me, and I was so worried about it. Again, not my finest moment, and I'll reflect on that later in the stories, but just completely devastated. I made the mistake of telling Layla. Again, wish I hadn't. If Layla was a friend, she would have said, hey, he took advantage of you, he raped you. None of that happened. She laughed and was like, oh, sleeping with two people. She probably lied to Hadi and told him about it and said I cheated with him. I honestly, I don't know. But I wish I had shared it with a friend so they could have protected me in my angst and in my hour where I just wasn't being a friend to myself after going through all that. Moving on, though, Hadi spent the night pretty soon thereafter, and being with him and seeing the love in his eyes when we were together was like a balm to me. Not only did I feel like I was home, but I loved being ravaged by him, even now, If I close my eyes, I can still see the look in his eyes. Now, I don't know that he knows he loved me, but I could see it in his eyes. Fast forward a couple days, and Hottie came and invited me to ice cream. He knew I liked summer ice cream. And he caught my body language. And again, I told you I never lied to him. All of a sudden, when he invited me to ice cream, as he's standing there outside my house and I'm outside my house, I realized I was in love with him. And I literally freaked out. And when he asked me what was wrong, I told him that, nothing. And he's like, I can tell something's wrong. So I basically told him, look, either you're all in with this. I'm not going to ice cream. Should have gone to ice cream. I like ice cream. Either you're all in and we're dating, or I'm all out. He literally walked off. And that was one of the times that I regret. I mean, literally, it just scared the shit out of me that I was totally in love with him and totally realized it, particularly with his whole, we're not dating stuff. Even when he spent the night, he'd be like, oh, don't make this awkward, and then show up at my house the next day. He just, again, I should have cut it off a long time before, but I saw him. I saw his soul. I didn't pay attention to, what I was getting from him. Before this, before this freak out, I had planned on going to Portugal, and then I changed my mind and wanted to go to Mongolia, and we'll talk about that later. But, there were a period of a couple weeks between my all-in freak out and going on my trip. And so, for about a week, I was like, well, hoping he would decide to date. I just wanted him to decide to stop the hot and cold. That's it. I'm not a big fan of labels, but that's what I wanted. I was in love with him. I was over my skis. My intuition was telling me that he needed to, to be in this as much as I was. Traditionally, I had sent him, when I was being vulnerable, texts. And so I sent him a text about, hey, look, we need to talk about this. We didn't really get to finish our conversation. It just freaked me out. I'd like to talk to you before I go to Mongolia. Now, in the meantime, Layla was making a big deal about him not answering my texts. And this was around the time where I had the vision of her literally on top of him naked. So I was on to her. And so basically, I played cat and mouse games with her and showed it. I still had, my chest was still ravaged with his bite marks from us being together. And so I showed her the marks just to piss her off. And then I just didn't, I felt like she was playing games on well, he hasn't texted you. He hasn't texted you. I just felt like she was causing shenanigans behind the scenes. But again, has nothing to do with her. But I was totally on to her. So before I went to Mongolia, I did a latch-stitch effort, texted him, told him how I felt about him, told him how I was looking forward to seeing him when I got back from Mongolia after the month. And then I went on my merry way. So that's, in a nutshell, the short version of, our love story, according to me. The interesting thing is, and I'll go into kind of the continuation and how the rest of it played out. But, the interesting thing is, this whole evolution, I changed my mind about how this played out, why I was who I was. But at the end of the day, I promised to tell you this chronologically. I promised to tell you this just as I felt at the time. I'm still in love with him. I still think he should have been my person. But I also regret not cutting him off way sooner. Again, puppy analogy. First time puppy causes problems. I'm not calling him a puppy, but first time puppy causes problems, you put him outside. You don't try to, rub his arm to make sure he's much better. And, so much love will make him behave better. So anyway, again, if I was hearing this story from one of you, I'd be telling you, oh my God, what the heck are you doing? But that's how it played out. So again, I'll continue the end of the love story on the next video with kind of the trip to Mongolia. And thanks for being with me.